Welcome to episode 24, and you are trapped in history with me, your host, Robbie Malcolmson. Tonight's episode is another meaningful conversation with educator Jacob Newsom, and it means a lot to have him on. So, Jacob, thank you again for spending your leisure time here, your any little bit of free time you have to join us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Interested to get into this conversation. It's always a pleasure to talk to another history teacher about just teaching history and then just the subject itself.
Well, I appreciate it. And like I said, I look forward to picking your brain and gaining from your experience. So I'm kind of selfish in a way where I like to have these conversations because I'm trying to gain as much wisdom from people like you as I can. And I've been lucky enough to have 3 meaningful conversations. So this being my next one, and my camera went off. It might do that from point to point on here as well too. So I apologize, Jacob. We'll see if I can get that back on. All right. So, but anyway, we're just going to kind of jump right into this. I think since it's the first time that I've had Jacob on as a guest, Jacob, would you be okay kind of starting off by discussing a little bit about your background, like where you're from, when you went to college, your major, any family, and your teaching experience?
Yeah, totally. So let's see. How far back do I go? I've lived in Louisiana all my life. Grew up in a little small town and, did well in high school, went to LSU. I left my hometown and said, well, I'm never coming back here. I'm out. And I went to LSU. I bounced around for a little bit, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I tried entomology and I tried law school, and I had to learn how to study on the fly, which wasn't great for my grades. And then I had a really great history professor that made me realize that I could take my interest in history and politics and political science and actually make a career out of it in a way that I thought was meaningful. So I became a history teacher, and then I taught middle school English for a little bit because I needed a job, and that was a job that was available. So I'm also certified to teach English. And then I ended up right back in my hometown teaching at the high school that I graduated from, and that's where I'm at now. And as of this year, 2 of my former students work at the high school, which makes me feel, incredibly
Yeah.
old.
Well, you said I don't know if my camera's going to come back on. You might just be talking to a little avatar here, so I apologize, Jacob. You said some interesting things there as well. I'm in the same boat as you. I looked up and down the hallway, and I think at least 9 or 10 of my former students now are teaching with me. One of them is actually my team teacher, so she teaches the other half of world history to the sophomores. So that's always a very surreal kind of experience too.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it definitely makes you feel old. Now, I wanted to pick your brain on something you mentioned just a little earlier, because I heard this with my last guest too, and I didn't know if you might be able to elaborate, if you can remember well. You said there was a college professor that really stuck with you and helped guide you towards using your history major in a way that you might really enjoy and get some meaning out of. Do you mind elaborating on, do you remember anything in specific as far as their philosophy or a certain moment? Just things that maybe stuck with you that maybe rubbed off on you as an educator?
It was Dr. Carl Reuter, one of these great men of history, in the sense that he really loved it. And he just really loved teaching history. And he made history exciting in a way that I realized I could also make history exciting. I remember one thing in particular. He taught a class, and he taught about, it was the Battle of Thermopylae, because it was ancient history. And I'm sitting in that class, and I'm really just not caring that much. And he starts showing how the phalanx would have worked. And to see a man that was very well off in age get so animated about a battle formation made me realize that there was something there that I could really grasp onto and find really interesting. And then I remember going to his office for office hours to talk to him about something. And in his room, he just had all these historical artifacts. He had all these newspapers framed from these major events. He had the Challenger explosion. He had the end of World War II. He had the Kennedy assassination. And he had a newspaper that was the end of World War I. And he was just really inspiring. I've always liked history. I don't see how people don't like history, quite frankly. I always tell students when they say that my class, is the first time they found history interesting, that it shouldn't be that way, because I mean, history is it's the greatest story of all time, because it's a story that is everything. That's always my joke with the French Wars of Religion. There's something French Wars of Religion for everybody. If you can listen to Wars of Religion and not find something that is interesting there for you, then your instructor is failing you, because
you're right.
Something
I did an earlier episode on that. I think it was episode 8. I did just my first one, hyper focusing on an event, and I did the Wars of Religion because I had someone email me and ask me if I could do one. You're right, though. There's like something for everybody there. I thought you brought up something interesting. My guest a few weeks ago, Jared Frederick from Real History on YouTube, like he brought up how important being engaging is, like to be engagement. And the way you talk about your professor, it sounded like that passion stuck with you. So you also seem like someone that tries to teach with a lot of energy and passion toward yourself. Because I'm just like you. To me, history is the greatest reality show, the greatest drama that there is. But I think it could also be one of the most boring things you learn if a person's not presenting it in a way that's like ideal. So do you think there's something to be said about the way that we maybe gravitate towards storytelling? So do you think there is a little bit of an art to it with teaching?
Yeah, I often tell people that my job is to essentially be a stand-up comedian that tells narrative history for 90 minutes at a time, because it really is all in the strength of the presenter. And you've got to find a way to present topics, even ones that aren't incredibly interesting on their face, like the agricultural revolution, in a way that is interesting and is engaging. Because at the end of the day, something I've really stuck with is that students don't learn from teachers that they don't feel a connection with. Students don't learn from teachers that they don't like. And whenever I meet a teacher that says, "Oh, most kids don't pass my class," I say, "Well, I think that might be a reflection of you. It's not the caliber of student."
That's a really good point, because I've tried to prioritize that well. So do you think, because you said before the show started, you're definitely a content teacher, like it's something you feel very strongly about. So do you place relationships as more of a priority than you would say even content, based on what you just said earlier? I mean, they're both important, but you make it sound like the relationships definitely should be a priority for us as teachers.
I think you need to have and I feel sometimes like this is so obvious, but then I see teachers that don't do it. You need to have an understanding, at least a baseline understanding, of how each one of your students works, so that you can present content in a variety of ways. So like when I teach AP Euro, I don't use just slides. I don't use just handouts. I don't use just lecture. I don't use just my whiteboard. Truth be told, when I'm teaching, I usually have everything up on slides, which is also available in Google Classroom. And then I'm writing and re-emphasizing things on the whiteboard, usually in some sort of like cause and effect line plot graph. And it's definitely a skill you have to work. I look at my plot graphs and stuff from a few years ago, and I can't believe that I taught them that way as the way that I teach it now. I think to be a history teacher is to never stop refining or stop learning your subject. I don't understand how you could get to a point in teaching and feel like, well, I've nailed it. This is exactly the way it's supposed to be done. And my PLC, my professional learning community at my school, even though like our world history content is like set, it's so locked in, we still refine it every single year. And every single year it gets better. And we've been refining it for, I don't know, a decade probably at this point.
Man, that makes me feel better, because that's how I feel all the time. I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like I have to begin better, refining things. And I feel like we've done our world history content the last 5 or 6 years. We keep adding to it and changing it all the time, because we constantly keep trying to make it better. So it makes me feel better to know that you all also have that same approach. Like you're You're never just like settled in and happy. It's not like you get somewhere and you're like, okay, we're here now. Let's just stay here forever.
Yeah, and everybody
You're
adds
constantly
something to it,
evolving.
and everybody changes it a little bit. Like
Yeah.
my other teachers in my PLC know that my strong suit is not like, I don't know, like engaging like group activities. Like I don't do well with those, whereas I'm much more geared towards presenting content, and we work with that back and forth. But like there's things that we still work on, like the 1800s, the isms of the 1800s. What's the order to do the isms of the 1800s? And I've tried to figure out the best way to present those, and I'm going to keep on trying. I'm convinced that the isms of the 1800s is best presented through the lens of like working class issues.
Oh yeah.
But you have to teach socialism and Marxism to do that. So that means you have to do industrial revolution. But then when you get to the Chartist movement, that's agricultural revolution. And like, what's the best way to, and unfortunately, I feel like there's not really a best way to do it.
Maybe not. Well, it's like if you look at, I used to show AP students the old timeline for AP Euro, and to many of them, the one that's like layered on each other, it's extremely confusing for most students because these things are not, I always tell the students, it's not like time happens linear in the way that we cover our class because there's so much overlap. I told them that it's almost like imagine a wedding cake and how the stacks overlay on each other. It's really difficult to know what to start what and when, especially when your events overlap with each other. But again, I appreciate you doing that introduction there, Jacob, and share with me some of those things that drive you and the fact that you're still changing, you're still evolving as a teacher. I can completely respect that. I'm going to amend my first major question tonight to you because you had already told us about how you got into history on there. I am curious because you did say you teach AP Euro just like I do. How did you eventually find your way into teaching your first AP history course?
So let's see. When I got hired at the school I work at now, I was actually hired to teach psychology, which did not have a curriculum at the time. So I had to like make the curriculum using just a basic textbook. And then I got fine arts survey added to that, which was just like, okay, fine arts survey. I don't know much about that. So then I had to start teaching that. And from there, I got courses added. And at some point, I went from, which I don't even remember at this point, fine arts survey to world history. And then from world history, because we had a teacher leave, I got AP Euro. And I also got AP art history. So I've got quite a wide range of courses at this point that I teach. But the one that's pretty consistent is world history and AP Euro. Do
you find any content?
I was going to say, to answer your question more succinctly, I just kind of fell into it. I never thought one way or the other, like, oh, I want to teach AP Euro, as much as it just was what they needed me to do. And
nice.
That's what I did.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen to me. We had AP Euro for a year, and the teacher that taught it for 1 year, she had left, so they needed somebody to fill in. I had been teaching like general education, world history, for many years, and then I taught about 5 years of U.S. history, and I've done integrated social studies. But then I kind of grew to like it. I don't know if you were like me. I know that first year I had that first APSI training, I was quite overwhelmed. I was like, man, after 10 years of teaching, I thought I knew like stuff. I thought I really knew the things. And then after that first day of training, I remember leaving after meeting Larry Treadwell, and I thought, man, I don't know anything. So I kind of had that overwhelming, like initial feeling that, man, I have a lot of work to do. Like I have a lot to prepare on. But they were right. I mean, they said give it 2 or 3 years and you start to really feel confident. So for you, how did you feel whenever you first were handed that? And then do you think there's some truth to the fact that as you're going through the years, you do get genuinely more confident as you're going?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that teaching I mean, you know the statistic, the first 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
if a teacher makes it through the first 3 years, they're probably going to teach all 30 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that especially with a course like AP Euro, you're asked to do so much. And I'm on block. I don't know about y'all, but
Yeah, see, I don't know how you do that. I'm on skinnies. So
I do
we have
90 minutes a
40-minute
day,
classes. Yeah.
4 classes a day for half a year.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know the joke, Napoleon dead by Christmas?
Oh, yeah.
My Napoleon has to be dead by the end of the first 9 weeks.
Yeah, my goodness.
Um,
That's the first 5 units of the
and
9.
it's really hard to do because
Yep.
it's, as you know, it's so much content.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got 90 minutes, which is a lot of time. But if you slam content for 90 minutes, none of that's going to sink in.
It's not going to work.
So I do think you get better. It's really a balancing act of like
Mm-hmm.
what the AP test wants you to do and what is going to make your students succeed, and not overloading them with like, because you got to work on the writing, you've got to work on the content, you got to work on diagnosing sources, you've got to do all these things. And I think you have to go into it even at year 4 or 5 and just say, there's not enough time to do all of it.
Yep.
You know, I got some I don't want to be mean. I got some good advice from Tom Ritchie.
Okay, yep. He's good.
Agree, disagree with that.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I'll just say yeah. Well, I usually watch like Heimler and people like that. I've never really watched his videos, but I always go, like, one trainer like highly criticized him, and then the trainer that I had this summer, they actually said, "Hey, Tom Ritchie's actually a pretty acceptable source." It seems like it's very conflicting. I like outlooks, and I don't really know how to feel about him, so I don't really have an opinion.
I've met him in person, and I went to. They paid him to come down here and do a training, and I think you have to separate things.
Okay.
And compartmentalize him. But he did give me some really good advice on top of a lot of advice I could have just gotten from his videos, which it is what it is on that.
Yeah.
Which is, you can't teach all the content. You just can't. So either teach the first 2/3 really well or teach the second two thirds really well.
Yeah.
Because the test is going to sit somewhere in that zone. So if you teach, you know,
you're right. That's good advice. Well,
you just have to view it, because it's just entirely too much content. My real axe to grind is, while I love the Reformation and I love Renaissance stuff, I don't think it's important.
Yeah.
I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it's important to our students. And it robs our students of contemporary history, like the Cold War, which you have to fly through, which is much more helpful in allowing students to make sense of current world events.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say, as far as connecting to the contemporary world, much better for that. And as you know, you're not going to see a DBQ on the Renaissance on the test, because there is no contextualization for that, because there's no prior unit before the Renaissance. So in every AP training I've been in, you're never going to have that 25% of your exam about the Renaissance. So I always tell them, to be honest with you, I don't know how you are. I do a lot of writing in class, but I don't do hardly any writing in Unit 1. Because I tell them Unit 1 is just about kind of building the foundation of the house. And then when I get into Unit 2, that's when I actually start doing a lot more writing exercises and training. I'm not sure if I'm really doing that right. But like you said, I've really narrowed things down through the years as I'm going. I'm starting to focus on other things.
Yeah, I show them how to contextualize in Unit 1.
Yeah, I do the skills. I do the historical skills.
I do
I don't like make them write an essay.
No.
Nothing like
and
that.
I do a lot of primary source breakdown, because the Unit 1 primary sources are by far the hardest primary sources, because of
they are.
So if they get good at breaking those down, by the time we get to, late 1800s, primary sources are a breeze.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because even the translations in English, it's a lot more modern style. You don't have that ye old English style that you're trying to read. You're right. The first 2 units, those are the hardest primary sources for students to really understand.
Like Machiavelli's The Prince. What is that? Like,
it's
so hard to read.
Yeah, yeah, it's very difficult to read. Not a long book, but it's very difficult
Yeah.
to read, especially for a teenager and their perspective. Um, okay, so you kind of touched base on this earlier. Maybe we can kind of wrap this up in a little bit of packages. I'm kind of curious of because you're talking about constantly being in like an evolution of yourself as a teacher. How has your teaching evolved over the years, especially in your approach to complex themes in history? Because like you said, you're starting to learn to kind of pick and choose. So I guess in a way to help other teachers out is I guess how do you know where to start with that? Because I'm trying to think back as a new teacher and I can't even remember how do you decide what units to hit harder? Or you put it better, how do you decide really which 2/3 are you really going to hit harder on? And have you taken Richie's advice on that the last couple of years? Have you spent more time and went in more in detail on that last part or not?
I mean, I really think that advice that he gave me is really good. And
Hmm.
what I really took from that is you want to stick in the middle because that's where
Yep.
the bulk of the AP test is going to be.
Yep. You're right.
Really, Reformation all the way up to like between the fires,
Hmm.
like 1930s. That's where the bulk of the
Yep.
test usually sits. And that's really what you got to focus on. And I think what I've gotten better at is explaining things succinctly and not getting bogged down in the details and more being like, this is what you need to get from this. Now, here's the details that make it more interesting and that are specific and that'll get you that
Hmm.
complex understanding point, which I think is kind of a BS point, anyways.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. I
it's
understand.
completely subjective, but that's a different
Oh,
subject.
yes. Yes, indeed.
And I
Yep.
think also you have to play to your strengths and you have to play to the content that you know the best and that you can be the most
Hmm.
complex with. And I think it's so bananas that they always tell history teachers to basically be like robots rather than being
Hmm.
themselves in the classroom because there's certain things that certain history teachers are very comfortable with content wise and very comfortable with from an analysis perspective, and it's totally valid, and they feel like
Hmm.
because of political climate or whatever that they can't
Yep.
present it that way, where the best way to make, for example, labor disputes of the Industrial Revolution more apparent is to use real world examples that the students are familiar with. It helps the
Hmm.
students understand it. And I think what I've done over the years, besides just getting better at presenting content and getting better at breaking it down to its most essential elements, is understanding that if I present things in the way that makes sense to me, rather than trying to present it in the most neutral way possible, it'll more quickly make sense to students, whether they agree with that viewpoint or not. They understand the
Hmm.
viewpoint.
Yep. I agree. I think as teachers, we're constantly in that psychological battle of teaching to the test or teaching like what you're passionate about. And that's going to lead me to this next question. I think it's a great philosophy question to get your core beliefs on this. I'm curious for you, just overall in general of the AP classes you teach, because I think you just teach straight through AP now with the 4 blocks that you do. I also teach general education. I teach 4 classes of that, and then I have 2 AP Euro classes. So I would love to know just overall, what do you think is the primary purpose of me and you teaching history? Because I think that a lot of new teachers that might be listening, they especially teaching AP, right? They feel like this incredible stress that I got to get these students ready for the test. But it's like you said earlier, I think it's more important that my students look back on me as an educator and say, this guy helped me change my life. This guy helped me open up my mind, give me a critical thinker. So for you, where does it stand for you? Like as far as to teach history, what do you think our primary purpose is really to do here?
I mean, I think you kind of just answered it. The point of teaching history is not to memorize dates
Hmm.
or anything like that, because at the end of the day, November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy shot. Like that's not gonna
Yeah,
like
yeah,
help you in any way. But if you can look critically at that situation and use contextualization and all these other skills that you must use to pass AP Euro, it'll make you a more complete and I honestly think empathetic
yeah,
individual. I mean, we've defunded humanities programs throughout this country for decades and
yeah.
promoted STEM and math, and we wonder why everybody's so hard up to relate to one another. There's something to be said for the soft sciences, I think.
Absolutely. Yep.
Engineering and math and chemistry, God bless them, just can't do. And because there is no right answer in history class, it allows you to explore critical thinking and your own viewpoint and the viewpoint of others in a way that the other subjects don't. I mean, you balance a chemical equation, the balance is a balance. You get it wrong, everybody's dead. It blows up.
Yep.
But when you look at a historical event like, I don't know, the popularity of communism after World War II, and you look at it from a variety of viewpoints, it helps you build empathy and understanding as to why someone might support that or why somebody might not support that. And it forces you to look at different people's perspectives. And when you look at other people's perspectives, you expand your own perspective. And I think that's incredibly important, especially with things as divisive as they are now. And everybody acts like they know the right answer and the other person doesn't, and the other person's stupid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, well, and that's another thing. That as somebody that has really strong viewpoints and has really firmly held beliefs. It's not like I'm some sort of middle of the road is the right answer centrist, but I think you have to be able to relate to the other side in some way, shape, or form in order to form a democracy. And being able to see other people's viewpoints is the way to do that.
And I think that's part of our responsibility is when we're covering these nuanced topics, people like you and I, we have to do a better job of going out and finding those other perspectives so students are exposed to that and not just showing them only one viewpoint of a certain kind of an event. And I like what you said earlier. I know some of the stereotypical complaints about students our age. I don't know what grade you teach. I teach sophomores. So I have that 15 or 16 years old. But we often hear complaints that our teenagers in our country today are very apathetic. Like they may not be very compassionate about things. But I feel like the rationale that you just gave, it reinforces that to not be a real truth stereotype. Because I think that our students want to be compassionate. They want to be understanding. I think it's short-sighted just to assume that because our students are young, that and what we see on social media sometimes, we see a lot of exaggerated things. I like being in a position where you and I have, like you said, not one right answer. Like these things are complex and there's a lot of interpretation of being there. So I think students appreciate being able to look at something and then have their own interpretation of it. You and I are there to help them learn how to think, but not necessarily what to think. And even though you and I have strong convictions about stuff in our own life. And so I appreciate what your philosophy is. I'm right there with you on the purpose of teaching history. Now, as far as this going into some strategies, if you're careful, I'm curious of this because I feel like you're similar to me in a way. I have to admit, whether this is good or bad, is that I'm also not a strong proponent of group projects, unless it's something where like everybody has their own individual kind of job. I'm a little bit more, like you said, I'm a little bit more, I guess some would say traditional in one way or another. But I'm kind of curious for you because you're sort of like that about as far as teaching strategies. So what strategies have you found, especially for teaching block? Like I just don't know how you do it, but I'm sure I would have to adjust if I ever did that. But what strategies have you found to be most effective for helping students connect with very challenging historical content in an AP class, especially when you have an hour and a half? And like you said earlier, you're balancing, you don't want to cram all this content down them because it's not going to be worth it. It's going to be a futile effort to do that. So I guess what strategies have you been trying to use to balance? And maybe you already covered that earlier. I know you talked about the different methods that you use, but are there any particular go-to strategies that you have found that have worked relatively consistently?
So I will say, I think it's easier, especially when you have 90 minutes. If you can connect a concept to an artifact. So, for example, humanism, Italian humanism, not Christian humanism, but Italian humanism. And you know what? I guess Christian humanism for that point too. If you can find an artwork from the Renaissance, Italian or Northern, that really exemplifies the virtues of that humanism, it makes it easier. So I know, for example, like Birth of Venus and Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, the back wall, the Last Judgment.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
those are great. And, I teach AP art history, so I kind of have a leg up there because I really know those artworks really well. But those are great for showing the virtues of Italian humanism and satire and all those other things. And then you look at like a Peter Bruegel, Hunters in the Snow, Northern Renaissance. And that's great for teaching Northern Renaissance. And I think, or the Marode altarpiece. Those are great for teaching Northern Renaissance. And I think the best way to take so much content and make it fit in students' minds in a way that they remember is to connect it to artifacts. But I do another thing that's much more traditional, much more easy, which is I do note cards. And if it's a name, let's give me a name from European history.
Oh, Otto von Bismarck.
You know what? I was also thinking Otto von Bismarck.
I don't know why Bismarck's on my head.
Otto von Bismarck. You write his name on the front, and on the back you put 3 things that connect to Otto von Bismarck. So Kulturkampf, the Spanish candidacy, and nationalism. Or Germany. You should put Germany.
Yeah.
On the back.
Yeah.
And that, I call it the Jeopardy method, because if you ever watch people that play Jeopardy, they don't know the answers to all those questions all the time. But what they do know is if it's, Victorian literature and it's about the downtrodden, boom, well, I got a pretty good idea of who that is. Charles Dickens is the author, right? And then if I make a note card that has Kulturkampf on the back, the next note card I do when I get to Kulturkampf, I'll make a Kulturkampf note card, and I write on the back anti-Catholic and 2 other things. And eventually what students can do is they can lay these note cards out almost like a spider web of connecting ideas. And see how Otto von Bismarck connects to our note card on the main causes of World War I or something like that. And
nice.
It's about,
nice. It's real good.
I really think it's about making those connections, those cause and effect connections.
Oh, yeah.
Because if not, that's like I tell students, they're like, why are we doing this like this? I'm like, well, if we did it chronologically, you realize I'd have to do Age of Exploration, Northern Renaissance, Italian Renaissance, and dynastic monarchies.
Yeah.
All.
And
Reformation.
the Reformation. And the Reformation, all the way there. Yeah.
And that would
all those events. And yeah. And I like that. I like you said that. I have a similar one that I learned last year where, you have those hexagon kind of things where, but yours sounds more new to us though. I do that method where, that's the one I've been using. Yeah. The last 2 years I have been attempting a hexagonal thinking, and within like a small group setting, it seems to be okay if they have some good guidance. But the note card thing is interesting to me. To me, it sounds like that's taking it a step further, because you're having multiple bullet points you're putting for these topics, and then you're spawning off of that as well.
So I've been doing that for years because we do and I did it out of necessity. We used to do the CLEP test.
Yeah.
And in study sessions for the CLEP test, we would run a practice CLEP test, and any multiple choice answer we didn't know what it was. Have you ever done CLEP tests?
No, I was about to ask you, what is that?
Okay, so CLEP test is an alternate certification for college credit. It's really boring, but there's no writing. It's 120 multiple choice questions in 90 minutes. But they're very, very, very specific multiple choice questions. So the best way to do it is to process of elimination. So I started making these note cards as a way to study so you know what to eliminate. But what I found is across the board, they're a really good study resource. And now hexagonal thinking is the hot new strategy.
Yeah. So I feel like everybody's pushing.
But my note cards, I realize now, are basically hexagonal thinking.
That's what I thought of as soon as you said it.
Construction paper and all that. But it's the same basic concept. And it's all about making those cause and effect connections.
Yeah. Well, especially whenever, as you know, those reasoning skills that we're trying to get historically, causation is a major one. And we see that as your main essay ones. And I know we have continuity and change as well. And I feel like, especially, I'm sure you're familiar with the acronym HIP. I feel like I hit HIP constantly. I feel like every day, every time we're looking at some kind of a primary source or secondary source, I'm constantly asking them the intended audience, the purpose. Yeah. So I told them, I said these kind of historical thinking skills, they have to become second nature to you, like as we're going through the year. But I'm glad you said what you said earlier too. I've been trying really hard to pair like certain kind of content with a particular kind of document. So for example, I did the Atlantic slave trade, and what I was doing right before that. Sorry, I was doing early colonization. So I paired the Bartholomew de las Casas writings right there perfectly, and it was layered right on top of the indigenous dying from the diseases during the Columbian Exchange. And I felt like for that Columbian Exchange section in our course guide, it really helped me complement that and then use that again. So I feel like little by little over the years, I feel like I'm slowly building that. I feel like I'm slowly finding ways of connecting primary and secondary sources in a way that adds to the narrative and the students find it interesting and whatnot. So, but again, I appreciate that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and move on to another question for this as well. So I'm curious because I've had this happen the last 3 years as well, is that, our students in AP, they're all known to be like higher level students for the most part, but I've at least had probably 4 or 5 students. They tend to be sometimes female more than often than not, that they're very good math and science students. They have that math and science kind of quantitative brain of thinking, but they don't have, I don't know how you put it, for lack of a better word, Jacob, they don't really have what I call a history mind. Like, some students just genuinely are history enthusiasts and they can kind of soak in what me and you were saying like a sponge. But I've noticed that I have some students that struggle, that they can read that textbook notes on their own and they could do all these other things and listen to my podcast and watch Heimler videos, do all these extra things, but they're not really able, like they're able to memorize stuff on islands, like separate segregated islands together, but trying to connect it all together, it's very difficult for them. And I'm kind of seeking advice on this from someone like you, is for students that you've had that have struggled earlier on and whatnot, do you have any type of different strategies that you've tried to use for them, especially your more math and science minded students, to where maybe they can find that causation and more of those continuity and change over time? So I'm just looking to try to do that better myself, because like I said, for the students that naturally love history, they already kind of have a somewhat of an easier transition if they're able to write pretty well. But I'm looking to try to figure out how can I help those ones that are headed towards a 1 or headed towards a 2 on the AP exam, because they're trying hard. It just doesn't make sense to them like the way their math or science. Sorry, that's a long-winded question there, Jacob.
I think the first thing that I'll say, just for the sake of any AP teacher listening, is something that I've gone with. And you know what? I like to think that I'm a pretty caring and all that teacher, but this might come off a little harsh. I don't think you as a teacher, if you are putting in a solid effort, should ever take credit for a 1. It's so astoundingly difficult to get a 1 on an AP test that if your student gets a 1, before you feel bad about it, you really got to look at what was the student's individual effort in the course. Now, 2s, that's my fault. The student gets a 2, in my mind, there's something I could have done. But if a student got a 1, they had YouTube on a tab or something, at a certain point, you have to let it go. But something that I've done for students that are they're more math and science and they're more comfortable sitting in that space where there is a right answer, because that's just the way their brain works, is I used to do something. Now, the downside of this is it takes a very long time. So it's really something I can only do in study sessions. But they've got 2 concepts they can't connect. I'll take one and I'll write it on one side of the whiteboard, and I'll take the other and I'll write it on the other side of the whiteboard, and I'll step by step connect the dots. This happens because this happens, so this happens, so this happens, and almost make it like a mnemonic device. Because I find sometimes those students, by the end of it, I can go, and so boom, and they'll say it, boom, and a rhythm, boom, 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 and it creates a mnemonic device. And obviously, like, there's probably better ways to do it. I haven't figured them out yet. I only got so much.
But has that worked for you pretty well? Have you gotten good feedback from those students when you have done that for the most part?
Yeah, they feel a lot more confident now. Since we aren't privy to their answers on all the multiple choice questions. I don't know, but it makes them feel more confident. And I think, especially going into a test that is so heavily weighted on a writing where you have to write what you know about, confidence is super important.
It is.
Nothing feels better when a student comes out and they go, there was a question on the writing section and it's something that we went over, because number one, it makes you feel smart, like you know what's going to be on.
Definitely.
And I wrote this, and they remember what they wrote, and you're like, all right, great, that sounds good. I predicted the Hitler question a few years ago about the change in culture from the end of World War One and the reaction.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I remember that.
And I think, I might be getting ahead of us just a little bit, but I think that's one of the ways you can really teach the course is look at the major transitionary periods in history and focus on those changes and continuities, because the test is going to ask about them. The AP test loves when like the role of women changes or something culturally changes, or a big event that changes things. And I think that's the way you got to look at it. You got to look at it as how does things change?
Good argument. And then I was lucky enough this year. I kept trying to guess every year, and I had 3 guesses. And I actually guessed the feminism DBQ this year. That I know there was different versions of the test. We got the one that had the one about first wave feminism, and in our class we hit that hard. So my kids came back after the weekend. They came up to me in the class. They're like, "Hey, Malcolmson, good call," because like that was something that we had worked on quite a bit. So a lot of them came in going, "Hey, I felt really good about that." And you're right. I think the last couple of years I've been focusing a lot heavier on that middle area of the year and focusing a lot more on social changes. I feel like AP really likes social.
They
history,
love a social change
for
they
sure.
Love a social change.
And then of course they had the Haitian Revolution the year before that we went over, but I wish I would have covered it a little bit stronger.
That one's really tricky.
It is. I covered the French Revolution hard, but I didn't hit the Haitian as hard as I should have.
It doesn't seem like, and this isn't to downplay it, I think the Haitian Revolution deserves way more time in our content.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, not to get into content too much, but the Haitian Revolution basically is the reason for the Louisiana Purchase. So, like, it's a huge deal. I know it's just just a slave revolution on an island, but, like, it changes everything. But I felt like that one was unfair because, strictly speaking, it's not something that is really hit hard in the CID.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So I felt like that was a bit sneaky. And, full admission, I didn't teach AP Euro last year. And I know the test has changed.
Yeah, a little bit. I'd say on the writing, it's gotten a little easier for the students on the DBQs and LEQs.
Which is a relief because diagnosing all those sources quickly is, it's difficult for an instructor to do sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think on one of the APSI trainings I did 3 years ago, the instructor actually had us do it. She gave us an hour. She gave us a DBQ we've never seen before. And she said, "Now go do it." And then for the first time in a while, like we had to feel that pressure of, you have an hour to do this, right? Yeah. So I can definitely empathize with my students on the way they're feeling. But you said something that really resonates with me there earlier is that, man, the confidence factor. Like you hit the nail on the head with that, because the confidence is a major factor, I believe, because if they can go into it feeling a lot more confident, I think they have a better chance of writing effectively.
Oh, definitely.
Now, that being said, I feel kind of ashamed to ask you this because I know I shouldn't be focused so much on this, but it's one of the areas that I've neglected a lot. I focus a lot on getting the writing where they need to. Like I'll let them write at home. I'll let them write sometimes in class, because with 40-minute classes, I don't really have time to be writing essays in class. So I let them time themselves at home, just like, hey, keep working on it. And I focus on them just getting it right. And the problem is I don't really work on timing, like putting them through lessons where they're timed with that pressure until probably the second semester. So when I look back the last few years, I've had about a 68 to 69% average on passing lessons. So it's not bad. It's a 15% higher than the Kentucky State average right now, but I'd still love to get higher. But I'm wondering, in your perspective, do you do anything to help them with that time pressure? Because I don't want to make the class about, hey, we're doing like ACT practice boot camp. Like I don't want it to feel like that, So does it take some of the organic enjoyment away from class if I'm like, okay, here we go, our weekly timed primary source, and here's a list of multiple choice. Like, is it okay to do things like that? Or would I be potentially ruin the engagement of my class by focusing too heavy on
I think you have to do like that.
Okay.
Because students have to get used to the pressure cooker that is that exam. Yeah. But I do think you have to be purposeful in when you do it.
Okay.
And if you're going to make it a routine, or if it's a one-off thing, or this or that. Because you're right, it sucks. It really sucks. Yeah. And like when students are taking a test, I can barely stand it. I'm so bored. It's not just for them; it's for me too. Like,
I think
I don't know. I have an advantage because I have 90-minute classes, so I can do an hour of like content and then be like, all right, for 30 minutes we're going to do this. But with like a 40-minute class, I don't know. I think
it's
that's
tough.
really,
Yeah,
really
dude, 40 minutes goes quick.
just like that.
Like we used to have 54 minutes, and now that seems like a luxury compared to what we do. And again, it's some of it is balancing RTI time and trying to get that into schools, and you have all that stuff. So it's complicated, but definitely, I feel like the more and more classroom time that goes out, the more stressed I become at getting that. But hey, Jacob, if you're okay with it, are you fine moving on to a completely different kind of segment or
Yeah,
topic
let's do
here?
it.
I'd love to
Yeah.
get into this because I feel like you have a lot of valuable advice. And I think that, we may have some new teachers that might check out the podcast at some point, whether they're a history teacher or not. So this could be just questions for you in general for advice for new teachers. So I'm kind of curious when you look back, because I can't remember if I asked you this earlier or not, as far as how many years you've been teaching. But for you, what are the most important lessons that you've learned that you wish you would have known the first time you started teaching? And this could be the first time you started teaching, but I would also love that first year you taught AP, but I don't know if you can answer both of those, if that'd be okay with that.
Oh man, what a question. I think the best advice I can give to other teachers that are starting AP Euro is don't do it alone. It's a lot to do on your own. And especially with like the Facebook group, there's a ton of teachers out there that are more than willing to help you so that you don't feel like you're constantly underwater. Because that first year teaching AP Euro, I mean, you feel like you're drowning the whole time.
You do.
And you get to the end and you go, oh, did I even cover writing and all these other things? And I think teachers, they need to realize they're part of a community. Their classroom is not their own little fiefdom where they have to control every single aspect of everything. It is a group, it is a community, and there has to be a teacher somewhere around you that can help you out. So my advice is to seek out other educators and, work together.
Mm-hmm. Well, you make a great point there again, and definitely making connections my first year helped me a lot. There's just so much to do, and I think you and I, we met each other on the Facebook group. So sadly, it wasn't until this summer until I finally joined the Facebook group. But once I finally got on there and started seeing what other people had to offer and the advice they had, it's amazing. Now, whether your network is a Facebook group or not, I definitely think if I would have been part of that Facebook group when I first started, it would have helped. And like you said, there's always like teachers that are eager to help you. So I think that you have to have the humility, and it's okay to admit, hey, I'm starting something new here. It's pretty daunting. Don't be afraid to go out and ask people for help.
Yeah.
And then, so I'm kind of another kind of psychological question for you, Jacob. And that is, what's your advice on handling the stress of covering such a vast curriculum of the 9 units that we have to do while ensuring that students truly understand the material? So this is more of a stress-related question. Well, how would you advise a new teacher on handling that newfound stress?
And this goes back to that Tom Ritchie advice. I think it's better to cover 2/3 well than cover it all. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get any points for getting to the fall of the Berlin Wall if your students don't remember any of it. Whereas if you only make it to the end of World War II, but your students have a real firm, hard grasp on that content, they're going to do better on the test.
That's true.
So I really think that you can't worry about how far behind you are. You just have to keep on going and just focus in on teaching what you're teaching and teaching it well. Not teaching it for a long time, teaching it well. And there's definitely a difference. I feel like sometimes when I first started teaching, I'd turn around and be like, oh my God, I've been in the wars of religion for 2 weeks. What am I even doing? And I think the other thing is, and this is something I tell my students, the bill's going to come due. Whether you do the work up front or you do it on the back end, it's got to get done. So you might as well just do it up front. And I'm terrible about planning because it stresses me out. So then I put it off. And what I've learned is just incremental little task is the best way to do it.
Good idea, especially when you're trying to get started. I know on our AP course guide, you have those recommended times. Like, hey, this would probably take 2 weeks. And if you're a new teacher, you go over that. I remember feeling that little bit of a pressure. You're like, oh my God, because when I was at training, it seemed like every teacher had like their calendar and they had it planned to the day. Like they do
Yeah,
exactly in the spring when they would be done and they could have a week or two of review. So I remember
yeah, but
feeling
what
that
they didn't
heat
show
that
you is
first
those
couple of years.
calendars get changed,
Oh,
and
I
by the end,
know. Yeah, they
yeah,
do.
by the
All
end
the
of that
time.
first month, there's red ink all over that sucker.
Oh, yes. Yeah, all the time. And you're saying that's okay, right? Like you're trying to tell
Yeah,
them that
yeah,
it's part of it, and it's more about teaching where they truly understand it and it's meaningful, not just I gotta get through the content, that kind of thing. Because ultimately, as you said, it's not really going to matter because if they really don't know it and understand it on a complex level, it's not going to matter whether you cover these ideas or not. So, Jacob, I would love to transition over to trials and tribulations. I've asked all my three guests of this, and this is something that I feel like it gives us some empathy for you too, like to see what you've gone through because we've all gone through hardships too, and sometimes it makes us feel better of like what you've seen or heard or gone through and how you've overcome those as you've gone. So the question I have for you next is, what have been some of the biggest challenges you faced as a history educator, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Well, let's see. Biggest as a history educator specifically. Uh,
Mhm. Well, I guess we get to our audience is that, but hey, let's just change that to just an educator in general because you had those years teaching psychology and you've done the AP art history. So I'm just curious now, just you as a teacher, just in your entire teaching career, what have been some of those difficult challenges that you've dealt with, and then how did you go by overcoming those?
I mean, I think a real challenge that all teachers are going to face is figuring out your own specific teaching style
Hmm.
and figuring out your own, and that includes classroom management style
Yep.
and how you're going to do that. Knowing when something's not working and transitioning. And I mean, aside from that, I'm in Louisiana, so we are not exactly a very public education friendly state at the
Mhm.
moment. And there's all these laws and rules and regulations about what we can and can't teach and this, that, and the other. And,
Yeah.
I would just say one of the biggest challenges I've faced is trying to figure out where that line is and what I can and what I
Mhm.
can't teach and what I can go over and what I can't go over. And I've decided that the best thing I can do is do right by my students and make sure my
Mhm.
students hear from a variety of viewpoints, regardless of how some guy in a seersucker suit up at the Capitol feels about it.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
the best way to overcome those fears is join a teachers union.
Hmm.
If
Yeah.
you're really worried about legal ramifications, there's groups out there that are there to help you. And I think you have to just realize your obligation is to the student.
Yeah.
It
Absolutely.
supersedes everything else, even your obligation
Yep.
to, I don't know, just to have a bit of a hot take, the parent's expectations. You're
Hmm.
responsible for that child.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, if you do right by them, then you're doing what you're supposed to do as an educator.
Yeah.
And that doesn't
I
mean giving
absolutely
them
agree.
whatever they want. It means
Yeah.
doing what's best for them.
Yeah. And I said it's hard to constantly fight that each year when in your situation if your state is also like fighting against that and it seems like the policies kind of hinder that process from time to time. You constantly have to evolve with it and figure out what's best for your students. I respect what you said there as well because I think that is our main responsibility is to do what's best for them no matter what. And again, for new teachers, that's hard. But even you and I are experienced teachers, and I still have moments where I'm stressed out. So I get stressed out at home and take concerns home with me of students and things that are going on. But I also think it just kind of goes with caring about our career, like caring about what you and I do. I mean, you and I didn't pick. People always jokingly say we didn't pick this for the money, which I do think is a little bit of a lie because it's not like me and you were doing it for free. Like obviously we didn't do it to be rich. It's still like a living though. Like you and I make a living, but I think we do this
Barely,
because it means a lot. Yeah, yes,
barely.
exactly.
Yeah, I tell people all
Uh,
the time, it is a calling
yes, it is. I,
and
I
it is a
really do
noble
think that is.
profession, but it's also a profession.
Yes, you're right.
At the end of the day, like
It's a key
I don't pay
word.
my bills on your sentiments. I pay my bills on dollars and cents, the same as
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. We had a situation a few years ago where Kentucky used to make it mandatory for you to get your master's within about 5 years of teaching. They eventually got rid of it, which was ridiculous because you don't get financial help for that either. But then they got rid of it right whenever I don't know if you remember in the news, Kentucky teachers were protesting. Everybody's wearing red shirts. This was like
Yeah, I remember.
2016, 17. So we were all in that thing. And so they were trying to change up the retirement really bad, basically doing as much as they could to deter new people from ever wanting to teach ever again. But it's just one of those things where I don't know. It's difficult to tell where to find the balances there within this whole process. So, but like I said, doing what's right for your students, um, the pay stuff, the retirement stuff, those are obviously concerns of ours. But I know we prioritize our career and all that too. I don't want to go too far into the political side because I know that for me, not a whole lot I can do anymore. And Kentucky is not a union state either, so we don't have a teachers union. We have something called the Kentucky Educators Association. So they lobby for us in in the government and stuff, but we don't have a union. We're not allowed to have any of that. So I don't know. Like I said, I guess that's a whole other podcast for another day, I guess, Jacob. But
yeah, I've got plenty of thoughts about that. But
yeah. And like I said, I would love to touch base on that at some point too. So hey, this might be difficult because I'm asking you for a particular experience. So if you don't really have one, it's fine. But could you share with us an experience that whenever you were doing the lesson didn't go really as planned, and then what you learned from that situation? And what inspired me was one of Mr. Heimer's videos. He talked about the moment when he realized, I think he said whenever that I was a good teacher or that I was a bad teacher or I failed. I think it was that I failed. And he had a weird moment where he was teaching a block like you, and he was so busy and so scattered that he accidentally taught the same lesson 2 days in a row. And the kids kind of called him out on it. And he felt like really uncomfortable. And he basically just said to the kids, well, we don't want to waste this time now. So ask me questions about anything you want. And they basically started talking about life. And one of the girls left his class telling him that, hey, this was the best class I've ever had, like this day was.
Yeah.
And I think he realized at that moment, kind of like what you said earlier, so much of the content obsession and the time, you can become scattered and you kind of forget the whole point. And that's what I really wanted to hit on earlier. So I'm sorry I got off track on that. But I think when you said earlier, finding like your style of teaching is extremely important because you and I have professors and teachers that we respected and that inspired us. But at the same time, me and you have our own style. And I get really excited about my style and I'm passionate. And the students see that if I tried to teach like my team teacher did, exactly like they did, I wouldn't have the same kind of passion. So I think that ultimately it's there. So for you, again, is there ever been a moment where you've had a lesson within the recent history here that did not go really very well? And then how did you handle that situation? Like, did you try to redo it again? Did you try to just modify it the next year?
Yeah. So I was teaching, it wasn't AP Euro, it was African American Studies. And for Harlem Renaissance, I planned a gallery walk. And I had one station that was art from the Harlem Renaissance, and another station that was poetry, and I had another station that was letters, and another station where I'd brought in 4 record players with different records that were that style. And I was like, man, this is going to be so good. This is going to be great. And it didn't work at all. It didn't work at all.
Sounds great. It sounds like a great setup.
Oh, yeah. It's boy.
Yeah.
It sounded so good. It just didn't work at all. I overplanned sections of it. I didn't plan other sections enough. I didn't have clear directives. And I think the only thing you can do in a situation like that is if it's a lesson you really believe in, like I think this gallery walk's a good idea, you have to look at what didn't work and just refine it. And you have to just admit this didn't work. Yeah. And if
having that humility is important,
and I think
right?
if a student
it's okay to admit it.
I've had nothing's worse than the feeling where you're halfway through a lesson and you realize this is not landing at all.
Yeah.
And
that's awful.
Pushing through it, or do I? And I've gotten to the point where I bail. I bail so hard.
I do too. I bail too.
Not working. I just go, do y'all want to do this? And they go, no. I said, I don't want to do this either. Can I teach this to you a different way?
Yeah.
And they say, yeah. And I just.
So do you think students respect you for that? Like having the humility in front of them to go, listen, I'm aware enough that this is not working. I'm not just going to keep beating my drum here. So maybe in a way that earns more rapport and respect from them, that you're willing to adjust, I guess, on the fly like that.
Yeah, if I can tell something's not working, because I always tell students, like, the work I give you is important, and that's the reason I give it to you. One of my great weaknesses as a teacher is I hate grading.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I wish we just gave 2 tests, a midterm and a final,
Yeah.
So if I give them work and it's not something I think is important, and I can tell that, like, it's just not working and they're not getting it, I just don't do it.
Yeah.
I think you got to know when to throw in the towel and know when to switch it up. And sometimes you have to know that, hey, we're stuck in this. We got to power through it.
Yeah. And you do whatever you can to make it work, right? And then the next
Right.
year you refine it and try
Yeah.
something else. So, this kind of builds off the other way. Not like I said, not to get too controversial, put you in a situation, but you do seem like a very enthusiastic guy, a guy that just does care about making engaging. I wonder how do you maintain your level of enthusiasm and your energy towards teaching, not just amongst standardized tests, but especially when you feel like, so me and you are public school teachers. And I feel like in the last decade, I feel like public education is more and more under attack in a way, or at least it feels like it's getting more and more like disrespected all the time.
Yeah.
So whenever
Yeah.
you and I are in a career that it's not paying extremely well, we're in the public image, at least in terms of mainstream, it looks like it's getting more and more criticized all the time. The system is broken and all these things, but yet I still feel like you and I try to be very enthusiastic and energetic. So what advice for like others, I guess, for you, like, how do you maintain that? Because, how do you maintain your energy and the love you have for teaching and history whenever all this, I guess, sometimes negativity, for a lack of better word, is surrounding it?
I mean, this is going to sound really braggadocious.
It's okay, man.
I know I'm right. Like, I know what I'm doing is right. I know what my intentions are. And I know that what I'm doing is important. And I have no issue calling out someone that says that it's not. I've invited various politicians, for example, to my classroom. I'm like, hey, if you want to come to my classroom, you can come. But if you're not willing to face me, essentially, I don't think you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And, some people say I'm aggressive. And you know what? Sure, I guess I am. But I know teaching's important. I know public school's important. I know that public educators don't fail students. Public education might, but it's because of a lack of funding and other things that we don't have any control over. And I had a moment. I won't give a lot of details just for the sake of, I don't feel like it popping up again, where I had a student that took a standardized test in my classroom, not one of my students. And they took issue with something in my classroom.
Yeah.
It was a Nazi flag. Which I had on the floor because I used it to wipe my feet on. And the parent saw that and then saw some other things around my room. I have a lot of like propaganda posters from like workers' movements and stuff. And I don't know. Yeah. They had a bee in their bonnet about it.
So did they feel like, in a way, that was propaganda from you? Like, were you,
essentially, I don't care, whatever. Essentially, what it boiled down to was I had bobbleheads of other presidents and other presidential candidates, and I didn't have Donald Trump.
Okay, got it.
And they took that as me trying to influence the election, even though all my students can't vote, whatever.
Yeah.
And it was a moment that could have gone really sideways for me. But when they posted it in, I don't know if y'all have one of these family and friends of a student Facebook groups where it's just parents.
I think they exist, but I've just never seen them. But I'm pretty sure they exist.
And they posted about it, and all the parents in there for the that commented posted defending me. And the reason that they did was, I mean, they don't know me, but their kids know me. And I taught their kids. And they went and asked their kid about me as a teacher because what she said was outrageous. And all the kids defended me. And from that moment on,
especially when your kids know.
Right. And especially in an environment, quite frankly, that is so negative. These family Facebook groups can be so negative. And I just, you got to stand up for what you believe in. And you got to have firm convictions. I don't understand the point in having a conviction if you're not firm in it. And one of my convictions is that public education is important and the skills gained from historical study are important.
Yep.
And I'm motivated purely out of just bullheadedness at this point, especially in my state, that if you want to stop me, you got to come stop me.
Yep. Does the increase of teacher burnout and the teacher shortage surprise you?
No. I mean, I think, quite frankly, it's planned, not in a conspiratorial way. I think it's planned in the sense that if you wear out the public system enough, that the public system will falter and charter for-profit systems can be put in place and there's money to be made. I mean, I don't think that's a crazy thought to have. I think anybody that looks at state legislation.
I don't think that's irrational. Yep.
Yeah. I think,
it just shows you there too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, we see this in multiple states. Like, you're in Louisiana, I'm in Kentucky. You definitely, I feel like it's not just our states, but you see it nationwide.
New Orleans is right
momentum to push out. Yeah.
And post-Katrina, New Orleans was a playground for charter experiments.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And I mean, we've seen what it did to the public education system in New Orleans.
Yeah, so like I said, I don't know. Like I said, I know it's never going to be like a utopia in the education system, but and like I said, even just looking, if somebody even just looks at our national budget in terms of education, it's very sad. Like it's incredible on that. But you said it best earlier though, because it's not for the education system might fail the students, but it's not the teachers that are trying to do it. Like we're trying to do the most that we can with the system that we have. And I do think that there are individual schools that are trying to fight like certain things and stand up for their teachers and stand up for what's right. But it definitely seems like why does it seem always like the people that's never been in the classroom are the ones that are always trying to call the shots? You know what I mean? They don't have the same understanding and empathy that the way the people in the classroom stuff. So I don't know. It's just a frustrating scenario.
Yeah, and I mean it's just a well-worn political playbook too.
Yeah, you're right. As I'm kind of winding down to our last couple of questions here. Some of these I'm looking at, you had already addressed earlier in the episode, so I don't want to really like beat a dead horse or anything like that on some of those. I'm kind of curious on this one thing here is how do you continue to refine your practice and stay updated on new approaches or content in history? I know some people refer to this as like, what professional development do you still seek out? But I don't think it has to be as formal as that, Jacob. I'm just saying, like, what do you do? Because you're like me, you genuinely like history. So what do you do professionally and leisurely that really helps keep you, sharpening yourself and keep? Because I like how you kind of allude to that. We need to be constantly learning and constantly evolving. You said that earlier in the show. So for you, what do you do on a consistent basis that either directly or indirectly helps to refine your craft as a teacher?
I mean, I keep learning. I read. I try to read every Saturday. Right now, I'm working through Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. Which, have you ever read it?
No, I've never read it. I definitely know of it. I have not read it. You recommend it?
I would. It's interesting. Okay. He presents things from a class-conscious lens, which I think is a lens that normally gets ignored in U.S. history. European history, not so much, but U.S. history. He does a lot of conjecture, which I'm not a huge fan of. But, like, the information is really interesting. And case in point, I learned something the other day I didn't know, which is George Washington was the largest private landowner in the United States.
Didn't know that.
after the American Revolution. I listen to podcasts a lot.
I do too. Yeah.
I watch a ton of history content.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I would say that really helps me in professional development is if I don't find something interesting or engaging in the way it's presented, I just stop reading it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't stop reading it if it's hard. For example, I read Soren Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, which is a very difficult text to read.
Oh, I imagine. Yeah, Kierkegaard is not easy.
No, it wasn't always fun to read,
Mm-hmm.
but I read all of it because I felt like there was something there to learn. But I was reading Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zoroaster.
Yeah, Zarathustra. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I got about 2/3 of the way through, and I said, you know what? I get it, and I closed it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
I find
I've done that
YouTube
before.
that do a really good job of like shortening content as well.
Yeah.
Wisecrack is a great one. They used to
Yeah,
do,
that's a good one. Yeah. You're right.
8-bit philosophies and stuff like that. Obviously, the crash courses are pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've gotten a lot better recently too. I mean that. Crash
Yeah, I
course,
noticed that John Green. We did some newer ones, and he's like talking slower in them, and he's not.
Yeah.
That was my complaint by my students when I first started teaching. Is he just goes way too fast, and they weren't able to really keep up. But you're right. Like, I would say his newer ones are definitely better.
And I think they also do a better job of following AP. I don't know if they look at a CID or something, but the crash course European history is basically AP.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I guess it's kind of a boring answer. How do I?
No, again, I can tell you don't seem satisfied with your answer, but that's exactly what I'm looking for. Is that I just read it. Like I read stuff, I watch things,
and I find time to do it. It's something that's important to me, and so I do it.
And like you said earlier, you said it's important for us as teachers to find things that we value outside of the classroom too. So even though it's history related, is that one of those many things? Because I know you're a family man as well, but is that one of those things that I value this part, even though I'm gaining knowledge from it for my career, you genuinely find it enjoyable?
Yeah, I enjoy it. I don't read anything because I'm going to be teaching it. Now, I've got certain books that I have picked up. I got one of my small shelves right here.
Yeah.
And now I'm not going to be able to spot it because I said I've got one. But it is the narrative of crossing the Middle Passage. And I'm going to read that specifically for my classes.
Yeah.
But over the summer, I read a comprehensive overview of the Eastern Front of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that just because I thought it would be interesting. And
yeah, why not?
It was.
And it sounds like you've dabbled in some philosophy as well too. Like I've gravitated more to the Stoic philosophy over the last 7 years. So I'll read Seneca or Marcus Aurelius and things like that.
I'm an existentialist all day long.
Yeah, I like existentialism though. Like I actually find it interesting. In my early 30s, I just kind of started dabbling a little bit in all the fields of history until I found one that kind of related to me on a personal level. But, and again, I know that with me and you teaching the Enlightenment and in Unit 4, it doesn't hurt that if me and you like philosophy, and then we got to teach that, because I've always heard at trainings, a lot of AP teachers dread that topic. They dread the Enlightenment time period. I guess because people either really like philosophy or they find philosophy terribly boring. But
you can like or dread any one of the topics.
Oh, yeah.
You just have to find something in the ones you don't like that is interesting. Yeah. So like for me, for instance, I look through everything at this point through the lens of class consciousness, a real dialectical materialist, which is a fancy way to say that I read Marx.
Yeah.
So like agricultural revolution, I don't know about you, but for me, super boring.
Yeah, me too. I have not been able to make that interesting yet.
If you take it and look at the Corn Laws and the Enclosure Acts and the Irish potato famine and the rotten boroughs, and you wrap it all into this squeezing out of the lower class and make it more of a class conscious thing rather than did you know that crop rotation rotates the crops? It makes it more interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think also just wraps it easier into the revolutions of the 1800s. But,
Yep. You're
you
right.
know, I think that you have to do that, because if not, I mean, it could be really boring. I mean,
Yeah. But also it sounds like,
exploration can be really boring, but if you
yeah,
teach it
yeah, yeah,
correctly, it's really interesting. It's
yeah,
just a matter of, have I resigned myself to being bored while I teach this, or am I going to find something interesting about
yeah.
this to teach?
Yeah, and that's been one of my major goals the last 3 years of the 5 years I've been teaching AP is try to find something about every topic, because I really, I don't know about you, but I really hate dreading a day of teaching because of the subject. Like I remember
Yeah,
early on in my career, I had plenty of days or weeks where I'm like, man, I really hate this topic. I got to do this and slug through it for 2 days. But
mine
in
was
my head, I'm like,
enlightened distance.
yeah, yeah, I can see that. But hey, even the way you brought up the agricultural revolution earlier, but it sounds like, see, you're thinking in a great way of thinking. I got to make these connections because ultimately it helps to put a better narrative around the 1800s and the isms, and and ultimately, if you go back to your note card strategy, you're still helping them build connections together, and you're making it a more meaningful way. And it's easier, like you said, it's easier to connect with something that's human and emotional, like the social troubles, than it is saying, crop rotation. I work in a very agricultural, like small town kind of community, so definitely strong FFA like vibes in our areas, which is
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
great. So it's not that they don't like farming and whatnot, but the more human side of history is going to be much more appealing to them than just the technological like changes that go on there. And then Jacob, if you're okay, we're going to kind of good right down here towards the end. I am curious just to kind of spin off like a couple of just like philosophy questions. I gave these to you ahead of time, just so I wanted to touch base on these with you, as long as you feel like you have the time to discuss them.
Yeah, let's
Are
do
you
it.
okay with that? Okay, so again, so it sounds kind of broad on the surface, but I mean, you're an honest guy. You're passionate about your career. You're not afraid to stand up for your convictions and your values. I really think your answer for this is important. So, in your personal view, what is the ultimate goal of education? Not just in teaching history and not just about exams or content knowledge, but what do you think is, especially given the criticisms of that me and you alluded to earlier about public education? Well, what's really the point of this? And maybe a better way to ask this question is, what's the point of public education? So I don't know. Tackle this in whichever way that you feel like is the best way to answer that.
Okay, let me think.
And
Okay,
obviously, education being individual and the way we teach
right.
as well.
I think the ultimate goal of education is to create a more equitable society. Not simply equal, but
Yep.
equitable.
Yep.
Um,
I agree.
and I think that the only people that fear education are people that have something to hide
Mhm.
that they feel would besmirch their side. Um, oh boy, I'm going to get this wrong because I'm thinking of it in the moment, but I believe it is Frederick. It's either Frederick Douglass or Booker T. Washington, or it's neither of them, and I'm completely wrong.
It's okay. I
But
get
they
it. You don't
said
have any
that from the
material in front of you.
moment that I learned to read, I was unfit to be a slave.
That's a
And I
great
think
quote.
that obviously I'm not going to be enslaved if I can't read. But I think that the point there is that the second someone is educated, they are able to think and they're able to question, and they are therefore harder to downtrodden.
Hmm.
Um, and one of, I guess, the great villains of AP Euro, although I think he kind of gets a bad rap, Robespierre says that
Yeah.
the enemies of a people want to keep them ignorant, and the friends of the people want to make them educated. And I think he's right.
Yeah.
I actually think a lot of the things the Jacobins did was right. And I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of factors into their downfall and also the frenzy that follows. But anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, I do think that the ultimate goal of education is to create a more equitable society, to make people harder to be convinced of things that are not true. You know, I don't know. I guess I could expound on that point, but at the end of the
No,
day,
it's okay. Like I said, I think your message is great. I really hope that at some point I can clip what you just said and show that to my students, because ultimately, that's what I want them. Because these are things that they just don't really think about on a regular basis. Just to show them that this is the real reason why we want you to be educated. It's not because we're like a manufactured babysitter for you, so your parents can just work. We're not here to be drones in a factory, like the stereotype of the 1800s of creating obedient factory workers. It's supposed to be meant to make them critical thinkers, I'll often use the word dangerous a lot in class. I'll say I want you to be as dangerous as possible in a meaningful way, in a positively kind of contagious way. But I like the quotes that you referenced earlier too. They make sense to me as well, and I think they're going to make sense to a lot of other people
I mean,
that hear those.
you was talking about making students dangerous or whatever. Every year when I teach labor unions, I purposely and subversively, I guess, teach students labor unions by teaching them how to go on strike and what the purpose of going on strike would be and how collective bargaining would work. And you see them go, oh, we could really disrupt things if we wanted to. And I'm like, yeah, you could. That's it. And one of these days it might come around and bite me, but I hate that quote that nobody teaches someone to give them the tools to bust the system or whatever the exact quote is. But I like to think that I do. And I don't mean that in a like, ooh, I'm a cool Red Scare 3.0 Bolshevik or anything like that. But, I think that students should be able to challenge the systems that govern them. And I think Jean-Jacques Rousseau is right when he says that the people most impacted by laws should be the ones that have the most voice in their creation.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have an educated population, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a lot easier to control the population if they're uneducated.
Yeah.
Right. If they're in ignorance the whole time, then you can be able to do that. I mean, it almost sounds like a Machiavellian thing to say. In terms of like something like that. Okay, last question of the night.
Machiavelli basically did say that.
Yeah, I know. I was about to say. I was like, now that I said that, I was like, did he say that? Because I've read The Prince a couple of times. So, well, anyway, last philosophy question of the night. How do you think the role of a history teacher fits into the larger societal challenge of fostering critical thinking and informed citizenship? Because I think that's a great question to build off of what you just finished saying at the end of your last answer there. So, what role do you and I have? And some would say you and I are just two measly little public education history teachers in high school. We're not high scholars or anything like that. Well, for like a new teacher maybe hearing this, what role could someone like us possibly play in something so massive and something so critical?
I mean, I think you're right. You and I individually are measly little public high school history teachers, but I've got you and you've got me and I've got my PLC, and we got this network that touches the minds of every single person that goes through the public education system. And I don't think that is a charge to be taken lightly. And I think it's something to think about when you think about how important your job is, also possibly what you deserve in compensation for your job. That's a different topic. But I really think that teachers in general, but especially in this specific instance, humanities teachers, art, music, history, English, other humanity, choir, theater, we have a unique responsibility in creating confident, impassionate, empathetic individuals. And if you want your society to last, it needs to be those things.
Yeah.
I mean, without critical thinking, without being informed, without understanding how things run. We just become consumers. And that's no good for nobody. So I think that history teachers, teachers in general, but especially humanities teachers, play a really important role in, like, we might not teach something that you're going to use in your day-to-day life, like addition, subtraction, division, chemistry, physics, whatever in your job. But what we're teaching you is how to be a person and how to interact with other people and how you can learn from the experiences of others. So I think we have a really, really important job.
Yeah. I think you've inspired me to do a YouTube short of you saying all that. That answer to that last question. It's very, very good. If I can figure out on here how to do it, because you can, it's your response
I'm a Luddite,
is great.
So don't ask me how to do it.
It's okay. Your response on here was really good. I'd like to think, Jacob, of course, I don't know your students personally, but I would like to think of the students that you've had in the past that has truly bought into your teaching style. I don't know how they could look back at someone like you and then others that are like you. And not think, hey, this is a person that genuinely cared about me. This is somebody that wants me to be a better human being. They want me to be the best version of myself. And I feel like you have that.
That's really kind to say. I'm just trying to do what I think is right and do what I think is right for other people, and I'm certainly not perfect. I'm not my best self every single day,
Yeah.
So, but all you can do is you got to get up every morning and just keep on doing it.
Yeah, you're right. I said just keep on trucking forward. And hey, thank you for trying to give me your best self tonight on the podcast. Like I said, I know both of you and I had a long day at school, and not that it wasn't a good day, but we're both having this conversation after teaching throughout the day and stuff too. And but hey, I forgot before the show, I wanted to ask you one more thing. I asked Nelson Bodenbecker this 2 weeks ago when I talked to him. This is that personal question I told you about. So, like you said, you told me before the show that you have 2 children and you're married. Yep. And I'm kind of curious because I do think this is something that is on a lot of teachers' minds, and maybe it even adds to the burnout. I've had some former students of mine that have left teaching because they want to focus on the family because they're just not able, or at least not wanting to balance both of those. So for you, for any teacher out there that might be listening at any point later, what's your advice for balancing family life and what's important there with your career, especially if you really do, if you care about your career and your students and you're really involved, like I think the majority of us do? How can one do those 2 things to the best of their ability? How to be a good father, be a good husband, but also to be a good teacher? What's your advice on balancing those things?
Let's see. What does a good book say? It says you can't serve 2 masters. So you got to choose one of them. And you got to leave work at work, and work will be there tomorrow. Because at the end of the day, while you're responsible for other people's kids for 40 minutes a day, you're responsible for your own 24 hours a day. I guess the answer is you can't balance it. There is no balance. One's more important than the other. You got to figure out which one it is. Yep. And then,
no, that's a good point. It's not. I shouldn't have used the word balance. I think that maybe it's about reprioritizing. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, one's got to be important and more important than the other one. And you just got to figure out which one it is. And then, that's that old Kierkegaardian idea of for everything you do, there's something you're not going to be able to do. So if you prioritize school, home life is going to have certain things happen that aren't ideal. And if you prioritize home life, work might be more hectic, but
a little bit. But you got to think about what's more meaningful,
Yeah.
To me, it makes me think
for every choice that we make.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of teaching economics. I've had to do it before, but I don't know why your response makes me think of opportunity cost. Like you have to think about whenever you make these decisions, you got to do a cost benefit analysis of these decisions that you're making. And you can't really replace being a father. Like what I've noticed in the first 2 months, I don't know how you felt because I don't know how old your children are. I'm newly a father, as I've said on the podcast before. I've only been
Right.
2 months, and it has not taken me long at all to realize that, being a father and the value that I have for that, it doesn't compare the same as the way I felt for teaching. And I felt, I'm 40. I felt for many years I could always be a teacher. I never have to be a father. I'm content with that. I like being a very successful person in a career. But man, once you have that child, though, or at least for me, I'm sure it did for you and others as well. It felt like a light switch went off. Like, oh, things are reprioritized now. I feel like I can see things clear now. I feel like I can see what matters more clearly now than what I did before. And I feel kind of ignorant than I was from 40 and younger on the way I looked out for that. So I really respect what you do, man. I know that there's a bunch of us that, you have a full family life and you also teach as well too. So, man, Jacob, thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for taking the time out. An hour and a half of your life, and plus the 15 minutes before that you and I had talked. I really appreciate everything that you had to say, and I love your convictions. I love your passion and your attitude towards teaching. I hope you hang in there for the long run, man. I don't know if you're going to make it to the 30.
I have to at this point. I'm too far in. I can't get out.
You have to say, I'm 16 in now, so it would be almost fiscally irresponsible for me to
I can't go
move
do
on
nothing
now.
else.
Yeah. And I've wondered that too. That's why I started doing the podcast, man. It's another thing I can do. At least I have this as well on the side. But hey, just to let you go on a kind of a nicer message here. Is there any kind of lasting advice that you want any listener to know? Because I hope you're willing to come on to the show in the future, and then me and you could go down the rabbit holes of some content and things like that together. It'd be an honor to teach with you, for sure. Is there any lasting advice that you want to say to any listener that might be a teacher or any listener that might be a student?
To any teacher, my advice is join a union. But to anybody listening, I guess my advice is you got to figure out what you believe in, and you have to stand firm on it, especially if you're going to be in public education. You're going to be somebody that makes a ton of compromises. I guess you could go that way, but at the end of the day, you got to go home and look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
And no amount of attaboy or nothing else would be worth
sacrificing
who you are. What's that? The end of the crucible where it says it's my name.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess that's a bit grandiose, but I really feel like it's important that you got to stand firm in the things you believe in.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. I love your message about it. I completely agree. And really, if you can't stand firm into it and you're trying to hang in there for the long run, you may not make it very long. You may.
No, and that's the other thing. If you get blown this way or that way by the winds of change in public education, you're going to wash out.
Yeah. Oh,
and maybe you should.
Maybe.
Get out in the first 4 years. Don't sit in it for 11 and be miserable.
Well, and maybe that's another reason why states like yours and mine, they're trying to get teachers in the classroom a lot earlier and often. I can't say I agree. Optimistic, but I can't say I agree with the no pay aspect, like the amount of clinical stuff and observations that teachers in college have to do on no pay. That's a little bit ridiculous. And like I said, it's probably more than likely it's to justify someone's idea of a new initiative. And then I'm just looking at it as a glass half full kind of
and I look at it as
if
they have a constantly rotating workforce, they can't have unionization efforts on campuses.
Oh well, yeah, that's not a bad.
But I mean,
I'm a bad argument.
I'm a union.
Well, this is another reason why I have people like you on here. My father was in a union growing up, but I'm in a career in Kentucky where we're not allowed to have teachers unions and whatnot. So for me, I love having this kind of a conversation with you because I'm getting to hear a perspective from you that I need to be aware of. Like, you got to be.
Unions weren't created to be legal.
Mm-hmm. That's true. You're right. So, again, like I said, the funny thing is we teach about them. Man, you teach about labor unions all the time and why they're important. So, Jacob, thank you again for your time tonight. I really appreciate you being here. And as for the listeners, as always, I hope that you all have a great week and that you be contagious.